You can tell that he's a sports fan, considering some of the artifacts behind him. He is John Servizzi, president at Tupelo Honey. We have been wanting to have this conversation. Having him on the podcast has been something I've been dying for a long time. We've finally, I don't know how we did this, but we got him on. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the Honest Something podcast, a sports media podcast that sort of bridges the personal side of those who work in the industry and also the work side. And John, it was a matter of time until you finally made it on, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. I've got you fooled thinking I'm a sports fan. That's the props did their job.
Well, your sports fandom, knowing and doing my research on you with your Butler ties,
Hmm.
I want to start out this conversation and ask you, where were you when Gordon Hayward almost sunk that half court three that he almost banked in against Duke in the 2010 national championship?
What personally and professionally, one of the most just difficult nights of my entire life. That was I can still not hear that building because the collective just absence of sound as the ball was in the air to the and the disappointment when it didn't go was pretty remarkable. But I was in the upper deck with some great tickets that the NCAA was kind enough to send my way. Um, and immediately, as soon as the shot didn't fall, immediately walked out and walked north to produce for NCAA.com the NABC coaches trophy presentation to Mike Krzyzewski at their hotel. And yeah, you want to talk about a kick in the teeth. That was you walk in and all the folks from the NCAA are congratulating Coach K, and everybody's jubilant, and I'm sitting there like, this son of a. But I mean, come on, that man's amazing, and that game. I mean, I'm lucky to call Brad Stevens a friend. Worked at Butler with Brad for a number of years, and just that game for everyone involved was just such a cool moment for the Horizon League, for Butler, for college basketball in general. And every time I see it, I think it's going to go in, and it still
You
has.
had this hopeful optimism that if you look at it enough, that at
Yeah.
some point it's going to go in.
Yeah, and we did some CBS Sports Network games with our friends at the OVC, and so sitting in the truck and watching the CBS Hallmark for an entire basketball season, and that open had that shot in it. It was like I had trouble at the start of every show. It's like, damn it still didn't go in. So
How often do you use glass when you're playing basketball?
I mean, it doesn't matter if there's glass or not. I am the worst basketball player you will ever meet.
I
Uh,
doubt that.
I'm a Cincinnati kid. I went to a basketball practice once in fifth grade and realized that was not going to happen very quickly. My athletic prowess is I am appropriate in my role as a administrator and engineer.
When did that come to the self-realization of you that was what you were best at?
I, I am I know myself. I'm one of those people that, I know what I am and what I'm not. I really kind of always have. And from a television standpoint, there was a young woman, Sarah Snow, who was a classmate at Butler freshman year, and Sarah went on to do some really high-end wellness, and she guest hosted on network morning news, and she was legit. She was good. And I remember I was anchoring with her, wanting to be on camera our first year at Butler, and she started talking, and honestly, she started reading the prompter, and I just kind of looked at her and went, I am so out of my league. I don't even know what I'm doing here. And it was very much a realization that you as much as I could work, as good as I thought I sounded, and I do love the sound of my own voice, ask anybody. I knew that wasn't something I was going to do. And what I figured out on the sports side of it pretty quickly was that I just don't eat, sleep, live sports the way you have to be a sportscaster. And I had an internship with a company called Lingner Group Productions. Terry Lingner, who's a legend in the industry, early ESPN guy, 1980 Olympics, just a sensational mentor. And Terry was one that kind of said to me, like, hey, I don't think that's your path. I don't think talent being on air is your path, but I think you'd be a hell of a producer. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try that. This guy knows what he's talking about. And I saw it too. I knew it.
How do you decipher, though, John, when something is worth keep working on to get better, and when something that you feel like doesn't come naturally is that thing that you probably should move on from?
I, I think for me, I've always been a person that I can figure out how it works. That side of life has always just kind of come naturally. I'm pretty good at opening software and making it go. I'm not great at reading manuals. And I kind of have always that's always worked for me. So when things like that kind of happen naturally, when I just feel like, oh, this is where I need to be, I can get in a groove here pretty quickly. That really kind of makes the decision for me. I'm like 80% gut, both physically and mentally, emotionally. I really, I really trust my instinct on most things. And generally, if I feel like something's going to be successful, it is. And if I feel like it isn't, that's when I tend to work a little harder. But I know early on when things aren't going to go well.
How do you measure success?
Money. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Not really. I mean, it really is for me. It's satisfaction. Because the most successful shows that we produce, the most successful things that we overcome technically aren't necessarily the ones that are seen by the most people. I shared with somebody the other day that the event I'm most proud of that we did as a company this past year was a D3 softball championship opening round game or quarterfinal game at the final site because we had just major tech issues, major problems like, we're not going to get on air problems. And we converted that thing into a 4-camera Remy show, brought in a crew, did it from Indianapolis, kind of in the moment on the ground. And those are the moments where I look at it, it's on the air and it doesn't look as good as it could, obviously. It's not perfect. Nobody's winning any awards for it, but those are like the moments to me that are like, yeah, this is why I do what I do. We overcame something together. We were able to call in favors. We were able to make things work. And those are the best. Those are the best days. Those are success. The stuff with the big budgets, the stuff that you just throw money at, and I joke about money, but big budget shows are complicated but easy because there's so many people, there's so much resources, there's so many opportunities to be successful. The small shows, the two cans in a string, those are the shows where there's so many opportunities for failure. And when you pull them off, that's satisfaction to me.
satisfaction also is, yeah, as you said, how you handle those situations of stress.
For
How
sure.
much would you typify your love then of adrenaline and being an adrenaline junkie, loving to be in these situations and the satisfaction you get in feeling that feeling?
It's great. I mean, I would rather have 10 minutes to do something than 10 hours. That's I think I mean you're nodding. I mean that's a pretty common thing I think in this industry. If you're kind of built that way, it helps. You know, I don't know. I mean for me it really is, time isn't everything. And I kind of lost the question if I'm being honest.
No, I mean, but you were onto something really interesting here. It's just because the idea of like what I notice about you, John, is that in a work setting, when, like you said, when things aren't going well, there's some people that can just shut down. And so it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. But
Mhm.
but you have the aptitude to handle things the way you do given the situation. And I feel like there has to be some sort of love of the hitting the deadline, or you get some joy out of the stress and the pressure of we're about to go on the air, that you canvas and makes things that aren't ideal turn out to be decent products on the air.
Yeah, our CEO Kerry Glotzer is fond of saying nobody died, and that's like that is his go-to when stuff is the worst. That is the line you're going to get from Kerry every single time, and I've learned that. I've taken that from him. I used to be a yeller. And Adam Coppinger, who's one of our senior producers and just sensationally talented guy, a guy that I knew was talented from the time he was a student at Butler. I mean, you just see it in Adam that he was going to be amazing in this business. And he was one that he turned to me at one point and said, like, what are you yelling at? What are you getting out of this right now? Is this feel good to you? And I'm like, no, not really. And what I honestly realized in that moment is it was the stress of the situation. It was the owning the company. It was the everything on my shoulders. And I actually just kind of came to the realization that I was never going to be successful if everybody was looking at me for all the answers and I put myself in the middle of everything and every decision had to be mine. And so I just started turning to people and saying, "Hey, what do you want to do? What's the answer here? How should we go about doing this?" And I started really kind of taking the approach that our successes are ours and our failures are mine. And that really is, that has stayed. That has absolutely stayed. I mean, I just think it's the right way to manage. And I really do try to get out of people's way. I got really talented people. We've got 45 of them, and nobody needs me to tell them what to do unless they ask. And if they ask, I will do whatever needs to be done. There's nothing I won't do for a show, including running cable and being a utility. Those are the most important positions on the show.
You are the quintessential team player, and I love the way okay, you're gonna but the way you describe the change in your philosophy as
Mhm.
a leader, I love, because I love how honest and frank you are with me about it, because you learned, you listened, and now you've changed course. And you said it, when you are leading in this way, it's very empowering, and people want to give you their best effort
Yeah.
because of what they see and how you are not all encompassing. And that's so brilliant in leadership, to have that realization.
Yeah. It really is. And it really, this entire industry is the people around you. And there are so many people, there are so many, and deservedly so, there are people that make a fortune doing this. There are people that run massive companies doing this. But the reality is, none of us are where we are. None of us are doing anything of any value if there aren't people around us enabling it. And I'm incredibly lucky. Maybe there's something to it, in terms of approach. Maybe it's just that we grew up together and figured it out together. But three of my original four staff members are still with us. And in that point from 2006 to today, that's kind of crazy, from WebStream to the acquisition by Raycom to the merger with Tupelo to the acquisition by Gray, that Coppinger and John Fritz and David Harris are still here is incredible. And then, some of the folks that we added shortly thereafter, Andrea Crawford is still here. Greg Wiedekamp is still here. And working at a very high level in the company. So, I just think the people around you are what make it happen. And that's I don't get I'm not incredibly touchy feely. I'm more likely to tell you what went wrong on a show than what went right. I have to remind myself to spread some sunshine sometimes. But never in a, but I try for it never to be in a, hey, you screwed up. Um, we screwed up. We didn't support you properly. What didn't we do as leadership? What could we have done to make your life better in this situation? How could we have prepared better? What equipment could we have put around you to make this easier, better for you? And then we just kind of go from there.
John Servizzi is with me. He's president at Tupelo Honey. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something podcast. You mentioned there that sometimes you could be hard on yourself. And to an extent, I feel like, generally speaking, most people in this industry, because of that desire for perfection, to impress, that each one of us in some capacity has the want, the desire to be really good. And that means being hard on yourself. How have you turned that into a positive, though? Because you're saying, yes, I need to be a little bit nicer to myself, but at the same time, I find that there are positives that can come out of being hard on yourself. Where do you see that sort of being implemented in your everyday?
I think you have to be real. I think you have to be real with yourself. It's not even hard, because sometimes the reality of the situation is you failed or you fell short because you're not capable of doing what you were trying to do. And that's okay. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You don't have to be good at every single thing. You have to know, I have a background in education, and taught at Butler for a while. Got a master's degree in education, and I think that's the most important degree I have. Honestly, I think that's way more important than the communications degree, because 90% of what I learned in the late 90s doesn't even apply today, right? But the education stuff absolutely, definitely does. You have to be real, and you have to be able to look at the person next to you and assess what they're really good at that you're not. And I tell people all the time, Greg, who I mentioned, Greg Wiedekamp, and I are really perfect kind of foils or partners to one another, because he is good and enjoys the things that I can't stand. If I have to have Excel open looking at financial documents for more than a few minutes at a time, I'm going to be angry the rest of the day. I'm not that guy. Greg is that guy. And so the nuts and bolts, the operational, hey, this has to happen. The one of my former professors referred to it as the fish sticks and toilet paper method, where you're worried about, hey, these are the things we have to go on and to be a company. He is so good at that stuff. And so you let people do what they're good at, and realize and openly admit that, hey, this is not me. And I've kind of, I don't know if it's failing up. I don't know what it is. I do definitely fight the imposter syndrome a lot. That is a thing that I deal with and remind myself of constantly. It's not quite the Saturday Night Live. I'm not quite staring at the mirror, psyching myself up, or the Ted Lasso looking big. It's not that, but I do have to remind myself, hey, sometimes, like, hey, John, there's a reason you're doing what you're doing. You actually do know what you're talking about here. You haven't just fallen into this chair by chance. But sometimes that voice is a little louder than it should be.
That mentioning of belonging, that sense of belonging, I feel like is a very heartwarming trait, and you see how it plays out here in your everyday life. When did you first feel, in growing up, that sense of belonging, and how enriching it could be, whether it's a friend group or something where you felt that connection that you're talking about, that I'm hearing from you at the company now?
I was like extremely unmotivated coming out of high school, like pretty successful in high school. Like, I got good grades, did the clubs, did the whole thing, was involved. And, it was one of those people that everybody around me was like, oh, that guy. And my mom and dad talk about this all the time. Everybody looked at you and said, that guy's going to be successful. Brooke Weisbrod from ESPN was a classmate of mine, a couple years behind me. I won't say how many years behind me. She's still way younger. But she was one that, when we reconnected years later, she said, "Oh, I always knew you were gonna be good." And I was like, I didn't. I'm glad you did. But for me, it was honestly, I came to Butler on a visit. My mom got me to come to check out Butler because there was a concert. Elton John was playing in
Oh, wow.
Indianapolis, and she got me tickets. And that was her way of like, "Hey, let's go check out Butler while we're there." And I hated it. I was on campus, and I was like, "This is no, I don't even care. I'm just going to go to UC or something. I'm just gonna, I'll do whatever I do." I'm just not really motivated at that time. And we got to the TV station that Butler had, which was off campus, a few miles off campus, this small little terrible nothing building where everything was held together with gaff tape and bubble gum. And I walked into that place and went, "All right, this is it. I'm coming here." That's it. And it was, I wish I could snap. It was in that moment that it was like, this is it. This is everything for me. And I knew it. I mean, I walked out. I was in the building for probably 15 minutes. A guy, Jim Odom, showed me around, who's a lifelong friend now. But I was in that building for 15 minutes, and I was like, "This is what I'm doing. This is the rest of my life right here."
Is that the moment, the light bulb moment, where you finally tapped into your sense of self in your identity?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It was never like I know exactly what I want to be, but I knew exactly where I wanted to be. And it wasn't necessarily sports, though that was a big part of what we did. And every freshman male that came in wanted to be a sportscaster. So of course we all did that. But for me, it could have been the radio station, it could have been music, it could have been, but it was definitely going to be there. It was in that environment. It surely was not any of the core classes or any of the other things that I had to do. That was all just a get through it, get the whatever I had to get done so I could get back to the station and work.
I hear this sense of this pervasive, pungent feeling of self-awareness that you have. Like, like you're talking about your friend Brooke, and she saw something from you, and even you to an extent, maybe you would discredit, oh, that you're going to be somebody, but to an extent, I feel like you kind of knew that you had what it took to be successful. And this idea of being self-aware of that and just understanding what you're capable of. Who empowered you to think that way, even from the very beginning?
I honestly, I don't know. I mean, a ton from my mom and dad. I mean, no doubt about that. But I, I've always been a little different. I, I don't, I don't know. I don't remember it. I don't remember it directly. I remember my mom remembers everything and tells me stories that vividly that I've just completely moved on from, and people and conversations, and oh, and then you said this, and I'm like, sounds like something I might have said. But I don't remember it kind of in a moment, but I was always that kid. I organized a field trip and presented it to our teacher in, I think, sixth grade. Like, I called the museum. There was an IMAX that opened in Cincinnati, and and I got the prices. I got the information from the museum and said, "This is how we can fund it. This is what we can do. Here's what I want to do. Let's do this." I remember this sounds so weird now, but there was a used CD shop that I went to, and import CDs, bootlegs, right? They're not imported from anything necessarily, but illegal. And I stopped in there every day, like after school, because I love music, and I always have. And so I would go through the catalogs of what he had available to order, and we'd place orders, and whatever spending money I had was going to go towards buying these CDs. And I remember the guy that ran the shop called my house to let me know that something was in. It's so dated because now it would be like you get an email letting you know your orders arrived, or Amazon would have just shipped it. But my dad was talking to the guy, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's at a graduation," and the guy was like, "Oh, your family friend or whatever," and he's like, "No, no, no, it's a party for him. He graduated high school this year." And my dad tells that story because he said that there was silence on the other end of the line, like, "Wait, that kid's in high school?" And he was just like completely blown away because he's like, "I had no concept." He's like, "I thought he was." I thought he was significantly older, and I always kind of had that. It served us well in college. We always got what we needed to consume. Um, but I always kind of had that, like, oh, he's 8, 10 years older than he actually is.
So you're an old soul. Would you consider
Yes.
yourself an old soul?
I was an Elton John fan in high school in the 90s. Yeah, yeah, I guess I am. He's right
Uh,
there. Right there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I'm looking behind you and I'm seeing the artwork. I'm also
Mhm.
seeing some windows out there.
Yeah.
When do you look out the window?
Rarely. I see the windows from this view as much as I see them from the turning around and looking out there. It's not a spectacular view. I think the camera's giving you some. I mean, we're on the second floor in kind of an office park. It's a great area. It's fine. I love Indianapolis, but it's not like the most. I don't stare out the window and go, "Oh gosh, I arrived." I'm like staring out the window and looking at the dry cleaners next door.
Well, in conclusion here, I think this idea that you haven't arrived is actually helping you arrive in that you're continuing to grow. Like because it takes away the complacency, not that you would ever have that because of the self-awareness that you have. But that's what I love about your story. And I was thrilled to have you and I'm obviously you said you're different. I'm going to go you're distinguished.
It's
Different,
you see the
but
gray, don't you?
stop it. Different, okay. Distinguished, okay. I can work with both. And you know what? Those are the kind of people I want to have on the podcast. John Servizzi, president at Tupelo Honey. I'm Bryan Fenley. John, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. This was fun.